Hey guys, um, forgive my appearance today, but it's been a long night. I wanted to create my own Edpuzzle video for you guys today instead of letting you listen to a bunch of strangers, because today's topic is one that, honestly, I'll be very honest with you. One I could care less about when I was your age. And when I was in high school taking world history, and I had to learn about this subject, I had to learn about it through reading what all these old dudes wrote. And it was really hard to understand and actually pretty boring to read. Um, so I decided for you guys, I would do something different. And I would just kind of like give you the whole, in a nutshell, version of what you're supposed to know about these guys, so that we can move on to better, more entertaining things. You do have a test next week, and these Greek and Roman philosophers that I'm going to go over today will be on there. So just kind of keep this video in your back pocket. I'm going to get started, and yeah, let's talk about these old dudes that have been dead for centuries but are still making a huge impact on what we do now. We are going to talk about Greco-Roman philosophy, and Greco-Roman is the words Greek and Roman, obviously, pushed together. Reason right why we push these two together is, as you've probably guessed, well, when Rome took over Greece, everything that they saw, they adopted as their own, as we've discussed before. So, a lot of times, whenever you hear about the people we're going to talk about today, they are lumped into the category of Greco Roman philosophers. So, without further ado, let's get to it. We're going to first start with the Greek philosophers because, first of all, there's more of them. And second of all, because they had a lot of ideas that we still use to this day, not only in the United States, but in other countries around the world, as far as philosophy, politics, science, all that stuff is concerned. So the Greeks are really the heavy hitters in this category, so that's why we're going to cover them first. So, before we talk about them, however, everybody always asks the question, why? Why do we have to study these guys? Why is it important to know this? You guys in particular just got done doing two whole units on the first civilizations in the United, or not in the United States, the first civilizations in the world, and Greece and Rome were two of them. But we didn't really talk about the people as far as their individual effects on life as we know it now. We really just kind of talked about trade routes and what they were best known for. However, in Greece and Rome, we have so much that we took away from the philosophers we're going to talk about that it really you can't really talk about Greece or Rome without talking about these guys as well. Um, because, like Rome, most of Western civilization, like the United States, Western Europe, has adopted ideas that were coined by Plato and Aristotle and the guys we're going to talk about today. So, I mean, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? Um, you see something you like, you adopt it as your own, and that's exactly what we've done to this day. So, nice little quote from Winston Churchill down at the bottom: those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. The reason I put that in there specifically for this slideshow is because you're going to see that every single one of these philosophers, except for maybe the last one, had something to learn from the guy who came before him and built upon what they learned. And that's how we have this kind of societies that we've built today, is because of this concept. So, without further ado, we are going to get to these guys. So, the first one we are going to talk about, my dude Socrates. So, his name is Socrates, and I've got kind of a picture of what he was believed to look like back here. Um, some of your parents may be familiar with a movie that came out in the 80s called Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. If you haven't seen those, I highly recommend them if you're, a fan of 80s movies or if you just like Keanu Reeves. But Socrates was actually a character in that movie, in one of those movies, and Bill and Ted, try as much as they might, they could not pronounce his name. they kept calling him Socrates. So his name is not Socrates, it's Socrates. So to kind of make sure everybody knows how to pronounce these names correctly, I have taken upon myself to put the pronunciations down below each guy's name so that you don't get confused and so that you can remember it later. So it is Socrates, not Socrates. All right, so on to what Socrates did. Well, first things first, he was a scholar, so he was a teacher. Um, Born in ancient Greece, born and raised, I guess you could say. He was pretty influential with the youth of Athens, which kind of came back to bite him later. But it was said that he believed in kind of the greater good of communities and that most people, if given the chance, would do what was right for each other and put others before themselves, which was, kind of like wishful thinking, in my opinion. But, Socrates is a pretty good guy. He sought a better understanding of the world around him through the power of questioning others, and that was actually kind of his main gig. Was that um, he admitted many times that he didn't know anything more or less or better than the man next to him. So he coined what was called the Socratic method, which was, as we're going to see in the next slide, something that had a lot to do with this concept. Um, Socrates kind of had this belief that, like I said, people would do what was best for the greater good. And he believed that so much so that he is actually the reason why he decided to go to war when he was young. And when he got back from war, he decided to dedicate himself to his teachings and he taught his students pretty much everything that he believed. And because of that, that actually ended up being the reason he was sentenced to execution. He was not looked favorably upon by his peers, I guess you should say, because he was older. Um, just Athenians in general that were not, up to snuff on his teachings, kind of criticized him because he didn't exactly agree with the concept of democracy, and because of that, he spread that knowledge to his students, and the Athenians were not happy about it. So that actually ended up being the reason he was sentenced to die. And rather than run away from it or try to stop his execution from happening, Socrates actually accepted his execution by saying, you know what, this is for the greater good. Obviously, more and more people are going to come after me if I run away, and more of my country's resources and time and effort is going to be put into tracking me down rather than, you know, doing what's good for the better of society. So I think it's best if I just accept my fate. So because of that, he was poisoned. He actually took his poison willingly and he was executed. All right, so what you heard just then was a little sound clip from a band I used to listen to back in the day. It's a song called Knowledge, and the main lyric in the song is called All I Know Is That I Don't Know Nothing. And that quote is actually derived from something that Socrates was famous for saying, which is, All I know is that I know nothing. Love this idea. I'm going to delve into it a little bit because the Socratic method is the most important thing that he left behind for us that we still use to this day. One of the things, or the main thing that Socrates left us with, was what was called the Socratic method. And the Socratic method, as you're going to see in this picture right here, was a method of asking questions in order to reach a conclusion about something. It is used a lot in colleges nowadays, and you could really kind of apply it to any situation where you're trying to teach somebody something. Um, you can kind of see an example of how it works over here in this picture. So, what would happen is your coach or your teacher would say something like, "What's a square?" And you, as the student, might answer, I don't know. Or you might say, a square is a shape with four sides. Well, then your teacher is going to turn and say, oh, okay, well, if a square is a shape with four sides, well, what about doors? I mean, could there be any other shapes that have four sides? And then that kind of is supposed to prompt you as the student to be like, oh, well, you know what? A rectangle has four sides too. So your teacher then would say, okay, so then what we can derive from this is that a square is a shape with four sides of equal length. Okay, so that's how you reach a conclusion about something through the Socratic method. When I was in college at OSU, I took a class in logic and critical thinking because I'm terrible at math. And fun fact, uh, if you have to go to college and you have to take math, like so many math credits, and you're really bad at it, look into taking logic and critical thinking because all it really is word puzzles, and it counts as a math credit. That's how I graduated. So anyway, I remember a question on one of my tests was, um, I think it was, all thumbs are fingers, but are all fingers thumbs? And I had to argue my way through that little logical tidbit there by explaining whether a thumb is, all thumbs were fingers or whatever. But that's just a kind of an example of the Socratic method right there too. So anyway, we use the Socratic method mainly in college courses. I used to use them in my English classes when I taught English. We would do something called a Socratic seminar, and I would love to do that with you guys if I could find a way to use material from history to do it. But you basically just come to class and you sit in a circle and you ask questions from each other, and you, in the end, find a better understanding of the material you're supposed to study because you've sat there and kind of peeled it apart. Um, I am going to ask you guys to think about this question down here on the bottom. Um, how are the teachings in the Socratic method, how are they used in other professions in modern times? Can you think of any profession where they might actually use this questioning method besides in education? Think about that because I'm going to ask you about it again later in the presentation. So our next guy is Plato, and this is him right here. Just like I said, right here, you pronounce it Plato, like Play-Doh, but with a T. And I gotta be honest with you guys, I'm not a huge fan of Plato. Number one, because I had to read a lot of his stuff in high school and college, and it was boring as snot. But also because he's kind of judgy, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that here in just a second. Backstory on Plato. He was born in Athens sometime around 428 to 427 BC. He was very intelligent, and part of the reason some people believe he was so intelligent was because he was actually a student of Socrates. Yeah, he was one of those Athenian youths that Socrates was executed for educating. So I think he took his relationship with his teacher, to heart, because after Socrates' death, he actually took all of his teachings and wrote them down in a book and kept record of them. So it is because of Plato that we know anything about what Socrates taught. So thank you to him for that. He wrote them all in a book and called it Dialogues. I had to read that. I don't recommend it. That's why I'm trying to give you guys kind of like the gist of it. But yeah, he had a lot of books, and most of the first ones were the ones that he wrote down Socrates' lessons in. And um, he also had his own star pupil, just like he was a student of Socrates. Another famous Athenian philosopher named Aristotle was his star pupil. So it started with Socrates. Socrates taught Plato. Plato teaches Aristotle, who we're going to talk about here in just a minute. Okay, so what exactly did he do? Well, Plato kind of invented school in so many ways, or at least he invented college. He founded the very first higher education institution. He called it the Academy. And at the Academy, he provided courses in mathematics and astronomy. So back in the day, for a very, very long time, actually, up until I want to say almost the 1800s, a lot of people would evaluate certain scientific findings, or they would base, things like medical care and medical diagnostics and pretty much anything in the healthcare field. They would base it off the position of the stars. So astronomy was actually very important back then to have on hand. He also had biology, of course, politics, because what what Greco-Roman school would be complete without politics? I mean, that's where we get most of our political theories nowadays is from these guys. So, and then there's philosophy. So Plato was a philosopher himself, as we know. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in this slideshow. Um, he This is where I kind of start to go, roll my eyes at him. He believed that the best way to rule a country was to put people in charge who were more educated, more intelligent, and more respectable, which I can't argue with too much. But the problem was is that he thought that philosophers were the best ones to rule, which to me seems kind of self-serving. He called these people philosopher kings. He thought philosopher kings were the ones to take societies to a whole new level and kind of spurt about this this great way of life. You had to be a philosopher king to understand how to rule a country, and that to me just, like I said, seems kind of self-serving. Just saying. His main goal with this academy was to train Athenian youth into what he called great statesmen. So these were going to be people who were going to be senators. They were going to be philosopher kings, as he was talking about, um, heads of state, people in higher up positions. So that was his main goal of creating the academy, and its location was actually upon a really tall hill and overlooking Athens. And it's because of that location that we actually get the term higher education. So, yeah, we got that from Plato. So, fun fact. Brings us to Aristotle. Aristotle, what can I say about this guy? Well, there's a lot to be said about him, but I'm going to try to be brief because it is now currently 9 o'clock at night. My child's going to wake up any minute. I've been trying to record this video for, all day. So, here we go. So, Aristotle, another Greek philosopher born about 384. As I said earlier, he was Plato's student. He actually is very similar in theory to another person we've already talked about. He volunteered to go to war as well for the good of the community when he was a very young man. If that sounds familiar, it should, because we just said that about Socrates, and Socrates, as we said, was Plato's teacher. So um, he became a teacher just like Plato, just like Socrates did. Education. This was kind of like a hotbed at this point in time in ancient Greece. So he became a teacher after the war was over, and he also founded his own school called the Lyceum, which was also in Greece. At the Lyceum, he taught a lot of subjects similar to kind of what Plato did, but his best, of course, was philosophy. And fun fact about Aristotle is that he really liked to walk around and talk as he was walking, which meant his students had to follow him around the campus. And if they were taking notes, they had to do this while walking because it was just kind of his thing. And they became known as wanderers because of this. So, just, I don't know, fun fact for you there. And the last thing, he actually had a star pupil as well. However, his star pupil did not go on to become a teacher. He became Alexander the Great. He became a conqueror, as we have seen. So, kind of the teacher line, I guess, ended with Aristotle in this concept. But Alexander the Great was his student, and after he received his education from Aristotle, he went on to conquer most of Europe and become or create, one of the biggest empires the world's ever seen. So, yay! As far as contributions, Aristotle has a lot that we have learned or that we have kind of adopted here in the United States. As we said earlier, he did believe in the importance of community, just like Socrates did. He believed that ultimately all individuals in society have similar needs and wants, just like Socrates did. He introduced the concept of classifications, especially in science. So he was really interested in the separation of the elements like earth, wind, water, fire, all that good stuff. So he was a science man. He is well remembered for asking four very important fundamental existential questions, I guess is what you should say. One of his favorite questions to ask was, what makes people happy? And you're going to find, if you do any more research on Aristotle on your own, that he said what makes people happy or what makes them successful is what are called virtues. And virtues are things like you could be somebody who is funny, so a sense of humor is a virtue. You could be somebody who's very intelligent. Intelligence is a virtue. You could be somebody who is beautiful. Beauty is a virtue. Those kind of things. And he argued that these virtues are what drives people to become happy or successful. And sometimes those virtues are challenged by other things. Like, for example, if humor is your virtue and you find yourself to be somebody who has a good sense of humor, you may find yourself in this battle between, okay, well, should I be serious at this point and not laugh at anything, which would make me kind of a boring person? Or should I be totally inappropriate and make everything a joke? Um, which would make you, oh, I forget the word that he uses for it, but not a very intelligent person by any means in his theory. But yeah, the virtue is supposed to battle with everyday struggles like this, but ultimately it is what makes you the person that you are, and that leads to you being a happy person or successful person. He also asked, what is art? I'm not going to go into this one too much because it's like opening a whole other can of worms, but just know that he made a lot of suggestions for what makes something a good play. Plays were a big deal in Greece at this time. And he was responsible for a lot of the ways that we recognize characters and plots in stories nowadays. So if you go and you learn about something related to character types or plots in Mrs. Cosby's English class, chances are Aristotle had something to do with the concept of creating a character. He asked, what are friends? And he said, there are three types of friends in the world. You've got your buddies, who are the people that you just go out with and have a great time. They're just kind of there to, be along for the ride and be there for the good times, and that's about it. Then you've got the second category, which are your friends that you have as kind of like a benefit. So you become friends with somebody if you want to use their stuff or if they can get you something that you wouldn't be able to get without them. And then there's the third type of friend, which is your genuine friends, the person that you're always going to be close to, that's kind of like your brother or sister at heart, that kind of thing. And then the last question he asked was, how can we get our ideas across to one another? He realized that, especially in politics, a lot of times we say things out loud, but we can't really exactly get the full meaning of what we're saying out to your audience. So this is how he stumbled upon and created the art of rhetoric. And if you ever hear somebody use this word, which you'll probably talk about in English class at some point, rhetoric just refers to the way you use your words to get somebody to do what you want or to agree with you. So I don't want to go too far into his what he deemed the rhetorical proofs, which is three ways you can get somebody to do what you want. But just know that Aristotle is kind of the grandfather of rhetoric. He's the one that we refer to or we think about whenever we watch political campaign speeches and things like that on TV. And, whenever we're asked to analyze a speech, out of persuasiveness. It all comes down to Aristotle. Anyway, so that's enough on him. Then we get to the Romans. Well, really, there's only one Roman in this group, so let's talk about him. His name was Cicero. And Cicero, if you can't tell by this picture right here, just looks like a thrilled person to be alive or to be around. He kind of looks like my grandpa, like in the face, that just stern face of disappointment. It kind of reminds me of my grandpa whenever I told him I was marrying a guy that wasn't a lawyer or a doctor and he was very disappointed in me. Yeah, totally looks like him. He kind of acts like that too. So let's get into Cicero. As you can tell by this picture right here, because he just looks so grand, uh, he had a lot of influence over the Romans. His full name was Marcus Tullius Cicero. We just know him as Cicero. The Romans really, really liked him. He was a statesman, politician, and lawyer. So, I mean, the picture kind of gives that away. He just looks like a lawyer to me. He was known for his powerful speeches, which ultimately led to his execution in 43 BCE. Yeah, he was known as one of the best orators of all time, and he's probably the reason the Romans loved him so much was because he was able to twist his speeches and to speak so powerfully, um, and because of just how well he could talk his way through situations. The Romans actually, at one point, called him the father of the country. I mean, they adored this guy. He actually did stop a plot to overthrow the government at one point, which helped just even further propel him into, the halls of fame in Rome. He actually, like I said, he stopped a plot to overthrow the government, and he took 5 of the men who plotted this event, and he actually ordered all 5 to be executed, which is really strange, seeing as number one, it was against Roman law to do that. Of all, this really went against the concept of democracy, and we know this in the United States that one of the things that makes it okay to have the death penalty in some states is that all death penalty I forget the word for it, but anyone who is sentenced to the death penalty does have a fair and impartial, speedy trial beforehand. And we got our concept of this from Roman democracy. So it was very, very strange of him to choose to do this. He is quoted with saying laws are silent in the time of war, because he believed so strongly that this was the ultimate punishment for trying to go against the government. So that kind of made people turn their eyes to him in a weird way afterwards. He was not a fan of Julius Caesar, and even Julius Caesar was one of the most popular kings in Rome. Um, and he believed that Julius Caesar was actually turning Rome into a dictatorship rather than democracy, which actually, in hindsight, he kind of was. So, okay, I say kind of, he was. And, that kind of put him on Caesar's radar and did not make him look very favorable to the government at that time. But after Caesar was assassinated, Mark Antony became the next one in line, and he didn't really like him either. He denounced Mark Antony, and pretty much in so many words, and in his powerful way of giving speeches, he in so many words called Mark Antony a big idiot, and Mark Antony, of course, retaliated by having the order or giving the order to execute him. It was pretty brutal. He gave the order to have his both his head and his hands cut off. Yeah, pretty brutal. But in the end, Cicero he be he was executed as well, just like many of our Greek philosopher counterparts were. So I think you can kind of get the idea from his story as well as some of the others that it's great to have beliefs, and you should definitely express your sentiments. But yeah, sometimes, at least back then, you kind of have to be careful what you say out loud. Okay, so as far as what he brought us, well, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams actually used a lot of his own words to create the Declaration of Independence, and one in particular was the concept of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He felt that these were um, some of our most basic human rights that did not have to be given from a government, they were just automatically bestowed upon us at birth. He also was very fond of the concept of checks and balances in government. He didn't think any one part of the government should be more powerful than the other, which also leads to the separation of powers that we also use here in the United States. He also discussed the idea of there being three types of constitutions in different governments. He said there's the rule by one, the rule by many, and the rule by few. And he actually advocated for use of all of these in order to create kind of the most effective type of government. He was pro republic. I know you guys haven't had me for US government, or at least most of you haven't, but a republic is a type of government in which you elect your officials to represent you. So it's different from an actual democracy. And he is the one who kind of stirred Rome to become a republic, and we kind of took from that. So yeah, he was pretty important. He actually brought us a lot of what we use nowadays in our own constitution. And one of the things that I kind of admire about him is that he idealized the concept of power given to the people, which again we use here in the United States. And he, one of his most famous quotes was, "The soldier must yield to the citizen." In other words, saying that no one person is more important than the other, especially the government being more important than the people. The people are the most important. So, yeah, with that being said, we have reached the end, my friends. So, I hope you guys have had fun learning about all these crazy old dudes, and I hope that that's going to help you finish some assignments that I've got planned for you over these guys, and also the test that you're going to have coming up next week. So, if you got any questions, shoot me an email or just drop a comment in Classroom, and I'll get to it as fast as I can. Kind of hard to do when you have a screaming baby, but I do what I can. It's been fun, guys. I miss you. I'll see you sometime after Thanksgiving break.